her company called Revolution 60 came out a few months ago. But she's written about attitudes towards women in the games world before, and the kind of nonsense they have to put up with, basically, and the discrimination they still face. But yeah, she received some hideous messages, which she subsequently tweeted to her followers, and I don't know what the retweet count is that now, but it was up to sort of 8,000 last time I looked. It was the final kind of straw, I suppose, that broke the proverbial camel's back on this, and I think that led to people, just people across the media world really kind of coming on board with this and thinking this can't be right, can it? And I mean, no one deserves to have these things said to them at all. Whatever you're doing, it's madness.
Well, let's bring in Helen Lewis, who's deputy editor of the New Statesman, and I understand a huge gamer. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Helen. Do you think there is discrimination and there is a general hatred of women within the video gaming industry?
Well, I think, as a feminist, I think there's a general hatred of women in a lot of places, unfortunately, and it would be very nice to think that this was only confined to people who play shooter games, but it's really not. I think what you see is a real hatred of women being experts, of women being listened to. So there's a very interesting idea called the Kool-Aid point, the idea that trolls get very upset when people seem to be drinking women's Kool-Aid and they seem to be taking advantage of their opinions, they're being listened to. And that's the point that we see there's real kind of hatred of those women kicking in. And trolling is a really interesting phenomenon because a lot of times it's what would have happened in neighbour disputes in everyday life. People would have rowed with each other over the fence. All of that has moved online as more of our lives have moved online. But there is this very specific type of hatred that is attached to very successful women, and it has occasionally happened to men. A male developer was threatened with rape and having his children skinned alive because he'd slightly tweaked the statistics on an imaginary gun. But predominantly we do see that these threats are targeted at women.
Let's bring in Chris, who's in the southeast of England and is a big gamer, and I'm keen for all of you to speak with each other about this. Chris, do you think there is a problem within the gaming industry and there's some kind of anti-woman view?
I think it's fair to say that there's a slight problem in general. As has been previously mentioned, that there is somewhat a balking of some people when they see some women in authority. I don't think that the case of the Gamergate is particularly an example of that. I have seen the cases have been heavily involved in the dreadful cases of harassment that have occurred. However, what I've been seeing being involved in this is I haven't seen this being indicative of the actual people involved in either the hashtag or the little movement that's grown up around that.
Well, I think I'd probably kind of beg to differ with that as somebody who's written an article about this, and I get a lively response on Twitter and other social media to articles, and that's fantastic. I always like to hear feedback, but this was an astonishing barrage, and I think it's very interesting to ask how many of those people were real people, because I think there is a problem here that you don't know anything about anybody who tweets at you, and you never know what their intentions are, and I think that there is a core of people who are very upset about what they perceive as women kind of coming in, taking their games, about the idea about feminist criticism of the games industry. But there is also a huge amount of people who are just there, what they call, trolls call, for the lulls. They're just there because they see an opportunity to wind people up and provoke people on. And I don't think that everybody involved in this is acting in good faith.
I think that's a fair point to say, but I think it's also worth mentioning that people are being defensive. I will absolutely agree with that. The problem is that this argument has really never been about women in gaming. It started about a woman. Obviously, the conversation started because of the indelicate exposure of the blog by the ex-lover. That's what ultimately is the conversation. But I don't believe that's never really been part of the actual debate. And obviously, people have been seeing little to no balance with regards to reporting. So whenever an article is being reported that is talking about the feminist angle that is an anti-woman issue, then people are being defensive because the argument has never really been about that. It's been, say, for example, journalists at Polygon funding developers' Patreons personally and then writing about them. That in itself is not really an ethical practice.
See, I think that's a really interesting idea because, I don't work primarily in games, I work in politics, and I don't think that in other cases of journalism is considered to be, if I buy a theatre ticket and then I review the theatre production, that's not automatically seen as a terrible violation of journalistic ethics. In some ways, you might say that's better than getting the ticket for free, and then you might say you're under an obligation to be nice about it so that you'll continue to get tickets for free.
I want to jump in.
But if you had sorry, if I could just interrupt. If you funded the production and then reviewed it, that would be the problem. That's what Patreon funding is. It's not paying for the game, it's paying for the development. It's paying for the person to create.
I want to pull this back to the issue of misogyny, and this is what we're talking about, whether there is a general hatred of women within the gaming industry and the experiences women have. And I think this is a good time to bring in Tatiana Nahai, who is a game developer in New York. I wonder what your experiences have been developing games as a woman.
Well, I don't know. Personally, for me, I have been really lucky. I haven't experienced, straight up sexism at all. I've worked for both a large company and a small startup, and I work actually more on the marketing side. So I do work very closely with the players and, the developers and the producers and really all aspects, licensors, all aspects of gaming. And I've been really lucky to not experience any of this. I feel like my opinions are, highly respected, and and if anything, I've had a lot of, support from it. But I know that it's a prevalent issue. My personal experiences make me think that it's not penetrated every aspect of gaming, and I think, but there's been big cultural incidents that have occurred from these gamer guys, and it's really put, I think, the gaming industry in a bad light. But I'm really happy to say I don't think it's penetrated every aspect of the gaming industry.
Can I ask Tatiana, what about the representation of women? Lots of people listening to this who aren't gamers will remember, your Lara Croft kind of Barbie-shaped physique. These, we all know about Grand Theft Auto and women pole dancing in the background and women being raped and attacked in these computer games. Is there a mainstream of computer games where women are represented, normal physiques, strong women, or is it still this over-sexualized image that is portrayed in the gaming industry?
Well, I definitely agree. I think that's an issue, that there is definitely a negative, just a portrayal of overly sexual women, and I don't think that we very often see, just the average, female character, even the really strong ones, the Lara Crofts. I love Lara Croft. She's amazing. She's strong. She's, she rocks it. But, she does wear the short shorts, and that is to attract that male target audience. I think there's a really great, especially with mobile games being so accessible these days, there's a really great surge of art-focused games and games made for the art with this beautiful music and these gorgeous graphics, and it's like a interactive art experience rather than, a full-on action-focused, medium.
That's interesting, Tatiana, because
that's part of the Gamergate as well.
I wonder if that's, and Chris, you might be able to answer this, I don't know, whether if that's maybe what irritates some people, that they feel that traditional history of gaming is being taken away for these kind of arty games which aren't true to the form. Is that what some people would think?
Yeah,
maybe a minority do believe that. I mean, in general, that's not the point or the purpose of what Gamergate is about. Obviously, there is an increase of the likes of the Chinese room developers make Dear Esther and what have you. Those kind of games that are either more artistic in nature, those things do exist. However, games like Journey was one of the most lauded games out on the PlayStation 3, and that was a game about walking through a desert where you couldn't do anything. You just could jump and whistle.
That's very true.
That was the whole point of the game, and that was a highly respected and loved game. And I think perhaps there is somewhat of a regressive view, because what currently is now, obviously people would think of, say, Lara Croft as with the tiny shorts and the unreal physique, but people maybe don't publicise the fact that in the recent reimagining of that game, they utilised the actress Camilla Ludlington and used her actual physique, which was not overly busty, not overly, and the game was not really a game about titillation.
Well, that's good, and that's very true. Correct me if I'm wrong, that game was a prequel, correct? So they might have wanted to use. They might would have wanted to do a younger, less busty version, because I think she was a younger version of Lara Croft. But yeah, no, I definitely think Gamergate's it's kind of like a cluster of so many different topics, but just one hashtag for so many issues. So yeah, definitely the topics that we're talking about, whether it's relating to Gamergate, can get quite vague.
And Tatiana, just out of interest, I mean, I don't know what games you actually develop, but if you went to your bosses and said, you know what, I want to develop this game about this really strong girl, or this strong woman, but she's a bit overweight and, she's not that pretty, but she's ever so strong and she's a great role model for young girls, would they even touch it?
That's a good question. It doesn't really fall under my line of jobs, but I mean, I do get to propose games, and I would say that if there's a market for it, if there's a target, a specific target for it, then I think that it's I think my company is really great that we're willing to explore more unique options.
Go ahead, Helen.
If there is a target.
So what I was going to say was that, I think and there are individual companies which are doing really interesting things, but there is a systematic problem that the AAA console titles, so the really big releases that you hear about, are presumed to be aimed at men. So, for example, Mass Effect was an enormously successful video series, a trilogy, and you give you the option to play the main character as either a man or a woman. You always refer to as Commander Shepard. Now, they know that 70% of people chose to play it as a man, and actually they put the male version on all the box art, and I believe that they did that because they thought that people wouldn't want to play a game that had a female protagonist. It was presumed to be a turn-off to that male audience, and this is the chicken and egg situation that we've got into, because the audience is presumed to be one thing, and therefore its needs are catered for, and therefore it reinforces that audience and tells them that they're the norm, and so it goes on and goes on. And that's the kind of state that we're trapped in at the moment, really, where it's hard to get a game that's got a female protagonist made because there's perceived to be no market for it, but you'll never create a market for it unless you start making games like that succeed.
Let's bring in Angela.
That's a very fair point. I would just make a very brief point. There was an argument, and there was a situation where the developers Naughty Dog, when they made the game The Last of Us, they put the secondary character at prevalently the front of the artwork, and they had to fight their marketing department tooth and nail because they were told it's about the man, take the girl out the back, put the girl in the back, and they said no, the story is about the girl, it's about Ellie, and they fought for that, and that game again was highly successful.
Let's bring in Angela, who's a gamer in Leicester in the UK. Angela, would you play a game like that with a female protagonist who's not that pretty, slightly overweight? Would that be interesting to you, or is that not the sort of game you play?
Oh, absolutely. But then I play games that have sexy female characters, like we've just had Bayonetta 2 released, which, Bayonetta is a sexy character, because there is a difference here between sexualized and sexy. I mean, sexualized to me speaks of games like DOA, in which women are basically just a walking pair of breasts. But you've got characters like Lara Croft and like Bayonetta who have highly developed backstories and who have highly developed games built around them, whole universes built around them, but who just happen to be sexy. And I think there's a danger here that we have, especially since I am a feminist, there is a danger here that we criminalize sexy in video games in terms of women, and that we can't no longer tell the difference between sexy and sexualized. So we get any character that is a woman in a game, all the game media can talk about is how she looks, and that is in itself sexist.
Angela, thank you for coming on World Have Your Say. Thank you also to Tatiana, to Chris and to Helen for joining us on this edition. Tune in at the same time tomorrow. You can also catch me on BBC World News tomorrow at 15 hours GMT, when we'll be discussing Ebola much further. If you want to carry on the conversation, facebook.com/World Have Your Say is the place to do it.